Um, so I'm really, I have to say in the beginning, I'm always a bit, when I do these talks, I have so many things that I want to talk about that I'm really bad at narrowing it down. So I brought quite a lot, and I'm kind of going to play it by ear where we're going to take it a bit as well, because I think I love your response to it as well and see what you might find most interesting. So I brought you around 3 projects that I think we can probably get through, but I think it's good because they all share, of course, a lot, but they also are different in their own way. So I think it's quite nice if we maybe do questions in between, and then we see how far we get, really. And so, yeah, I think I'm going to try and share. I'm using this format today.
Yeah. Right.
So hello, everyone. My name is Alexa. I am at one part of Peut, which is a sort of collective I started about 10 years ago now. And we are based in some weird in-between of fashion, costume, interaction, participation, performance, and technology. I think it's nice to just think of us, though, as some form of definitely body-focused designers. I'm trying to avoid the term in general, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary. The reason why I do that is because I have been there and I felt uncomfortable. Mostly because I think it's nice if you have some form of discipline that you really can call your own in regards to the knowledge you have. It doesn't mean that you're not branching into all the other disciplines, but I found when I left fashion, and I did study BA fashion, worked in the fashion industry for a while, and then went on to do my MA in design interactions. I found that when I left that space, which was my intention because I didn't like it at the time, and I came into this new space, I suddenly found that in that new space, my knowledge of fashion was quite helpful, and actually gave me the specialism that made me confident to actually take on things the way that I did. So that said, I probably wouldn't call myself a fashion designer, but you will see a lot of garments or body related things in this work. The collective itself is me, and at the moment especially Bina Roth, who's from a jewelry background, but also mixed media textile stuff, working a lot with sensors and all of these things. So we always have this sort of, we dip in and out of technologies as well. But we see them, and that's also quite important to say, maybe more as I like to tell my students, technologies for me should always be the brush rather than the main focus. So if you paint a picture, no one looks at the brush. So I hope that we manage to do that with our work in regards to technology, which I have to say sometimes is difficult, because when people see new immersive or technological projects, they tend to focus on that, and our kind of main goal in many of the projects you will see today as well is to really kind of not let that happen. And it's become a bit of a focus as well, because we are definitely material based in our original practices and have a very strong feeling for the material stuff. So that's a bit of an introduction, and hopefully also a way into this presentation, because it's going to be all kinds of different things. And as said, please do ask questions. I think if we can get through one project and ask questions at the end, then I think that's quite good. In regards to after the project, I'll always leave some space. So the first one I want to talk about is a project that is ongoing, and that makes it especially hard to talk about. You might know that yourself from your own practice. I think if things are finished, it's much easier to describe and evaluate and reflect on them. But this one is called Dazzle, and it is a huge collaboration we've been working on over the last 2 years. Not just because of the pandemic, it took that long, but it sort of gave us the advantage that we managed to somehow really take the time, and that was one positive outcome of it. It's a huge collaboration though between our studio and the studio Gibson Martelli. And just about them briefly, they are based within the visual arts, but Ruth is a researcher and choreographer in dance and VR, so virtual reality. And Bruno is an artist in the same space, and they've been collaborating for ages together in this realm. So they have a really good understanding of immersive, which is, of course, at the moment, a very big topic. And so for us, they were in particular interesting because we share a common interest for patterns that appear especially within camouflage. So, and the dazzle pattern itself is a historic camouflage pattern. I'll try to keep that really brief, but some of you might know it. It was painted on ships in World War I to confuse the enemy. So, which is quite interesting because today, of course, it doesn't have a meaning anymore in regards to machines get not confused by looking at optical illusions. But back then that was a sort of fascinating way of trying to confuse the enemy about the distance of the ship. So the idea of the dazzle pattern isn't to hide you, but to sort of disguise you by confusing the understanding of where you're at in space. And what was so fascinating about this whole dazzle pattern, however, is that it really made its way into the cultural expressions of the time in terms of fashion, music, all of these things. And here is sort of what we really started to focus on, which is the Dazzle Ball. And the Dazzle Ball was a massive event in 1919 that happened at the Royal Albert Hall in London. It sort of reopened cultural life after the war. So there's some parallels to today. I mean, there was the big flu back then as well. But I mean, just this reopening and this coming together and this collective experience that we see in this image is sort of what we really were interested in on many different levels. And I'm going to try, because it's, as said, it's all not like super structured in our heads yet. We're in the middle of it. But I think I'm going to try and bring two things out. And one definitely is that at the moment we have this whole focus on immersive experience. And this word or this phrase is for me already sort of a cliche. And it's interesting how a lot of words are being adopted in sort of practices that are relating to technology, and then you can't use them outside that realm anymore. So when we talk of immersive today, everyone will immediately think of virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, all of these things. But actually we had immersive experience before that. And we think that the Dazzle Ball especially was one of those. And what for me as a, of course, body-focused person is quite interesting here is that what happened was the people, and you see these illustrations on the side, the people actually made their own costumes for this ball. So they prepared for this event, they made their own outfits and came, and it must have been such a fantastic togetherness. At the time, the Royal Albert Hall wasn't as privileged as it is today, by the way, which is also quite nice. We talked to the historian of the time, and it was a place of a lot of things happened there. So what we are trying to do at the moment is to work towards a mixed reality costume ball. And there's so many different layers to this, but one of them is definitely the dance aspect, and there's the fashion aspect. And there is the experience of togetherness, of course. And the dance aspect or the performance aspect is quite interesting technologically, because what we are doing is we are using high spec motion capture system to actually pre-record dancers in our studio. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the technical side, but what is fascinating in that realm is that you can then duplicate bodies, and you can produce this multiple people online in this virtual reality in quite a fascinating manner. And motion capturing dancers has mostly been done, of course, for animation, film, etc. But in VR especially, it has found its own place. Now, from a dance perspective, there's a lot that Ruth could probably talk to as a choreographer why that is interesting to her. From a perspective of motion, I'm going to go into more detail, but I'm going to switch briefly and show you a little video of a showcase we did in November. And it's a sort of demonstrator project showcase that we did for tech companies here in London that are not actually tech researchers, not companies. And what is fascinating, can you you see just my presentation at the moment, are you? I might have to just switch to showing my whole screen. So, where are we? Right, let me switch to this one. Can you see my YouTube right now?
Yeah, it works.
Okay, watch this and then we talk more. Okay, this goes on for a while, so I'm not going to let you watch the whole thing. What is important to say is that this was, as I said, it's a sort of demonstrator, so it was a sort of proof of concept that it all works. What doesn't work in this thing is the audience interaction, which is quite important because when we did it before, people actually started dancing even though they were in VR. The idea is that actually the audience doesn't stand on the side watching what is happening on stage. So the idea is that we actually kind of merge these two worlds of behind or in front of stage and stage. So it actually kind of becomes one, and you can walk around the whole scene whilst someone is dancing. You can dance there as well. We have managed to do that in earlier presentations, but this one had a particular problem in terms of it being a demonstrator, and it always a bit like tech up. So but that just as a side note, I think what is nice to see in here is that you have people in VR, you have people not in VR. And what happens usually when you go to any VR experience is that you have a very lonesome experience, because you go into VR and other people can't see what you are seeing, but also it's solitary in its make. So what we've done here is that we actually managed to live motion capture the dancers on the stage, and at the same time stream them out to these other handheld devices so that you could watch together, and that you can basically have this look into the virtual world, which is quite special, quite hard to achieve, but also in a way our means to have people join in from around the world and watch this experience, because it actually can stream the motion to any place in the world. So it actually really becomes an international experience. So this is just a little insight, but there's so much on this technical detail that I don't actually want to get into, because as I said in the beginning, it should rather be the brush. So I'm going to talk more about the other sides of the project as well, because we see it in the end as an experience where you actually get to come into the space and slowly and in stages moved into this new world of VR, so you're not thrown into it to the degree that you are at the moment. Can you see my presentation again?
No, it's still on the YouTube, I think.
Okay, so I need to
switch screen.
Switch again. So yeah, so what is the whole point of us in this project as well is actually that you come in, and the first thing that happens is that pre the showcase, you get an invitation where you can choose an outfit you might want to wear when you come to the showcase. And how these outfits are being produced is another story. But your first step into immersion is actually to put on a costume rather than to go into these technical worlds. And the power of that is, of course, as well, that it gives you a collective experience in regards everyone in the room is wearing a similar outfit, and it really becomes this shared togetherness that I was talking about. And the material aspect and the touch and the feel of it, of course, is a huge part of experience that we consider immersive as well. Now, in terms of that, we also will have dancers that aren't on the motion capture stage and are actually wearing outfits that are inspired by those worlds. So what you see on this page is very much a work in progress. You see a character on the right bottom that then made it into the virtual worlds. And at the moment, we're working on this costume that then really brings it out into the material world. And what is also kind of the whole point of that, again, is that we know that people have different expectations when they come to such an event. And we don't want people to have to go into VR. We want them to actually kind of meander through these realities. And the whole point of talking about realities here is that we, of course, today talk of multiple realities, but in our belief, or there's that concept in general is actually contested, because reality is a sort of term that you should really consider, as everyone has their own reality. And so that again is sort of a way of really trying to merge and understand what's going on in these worlds. So to some degree, a lot of what I'm talking about at the moment is us experimenting in these new spaces, trying to understand how our practice can migrate, but also exist in between these worlds without going for one or the other. And one thing that I think is really fun to see in that context is us also understanding that there is very different needs when you design in these worlds. So on this side, you see me, and I've built some characters that then go into VR, but it's a very different way. Of course, I'm trying not to use the right or the exact way that I would design in fashion terms in the real world. So I'm designing these characters sort of really as beings. But what really is the most exciting part of the design journey here isn't the visual look of them, but how they move. Because all of these movements have been recorded from our dancers. And you can design characters as much as you want, but when you put them in there and you see them move, that's the moment where you actually understand whether they are working or not. So, and then you go back and you tweak, and it's sort of the same process as you do when you put it on a person and see them wearing it, whether it fits. But I think the extent to which we look at garments moving on the body is actually much less than in this world. So that for me is one of the most fascinating moments. That I really enjoy that a lot. And so it expands your practice into these worlds, and you can take little bits from both worlds and they will influence the other worlds. What is also important in regards to what you see on the right side is that when you look into motion capture and technical wearables, I put one picture on the top right there. This is what it mostly looks like, and it's not very nice to wear. It also isn't something that is easy to hand out to audiences, which we will have to do once our event is happening, because that's another special thing that you didn't see in the video, actually, that the audiences themselves will be captured so they can see each other in VR as well. So one thing that we really got excited about is to make these things that you have to wear to get motion captured turn them into a pleasurable experience as well. So this is first experiments by my colleague Bina when she's working in the jewelry side of things. And what you see here is little balls. These are motion capture balls. They're integrated in the jewelry. She's doing a residency in Berlin at the Technik Museum at the moment to continue that work in more detail. But what is so fascinating as well is that these motion capture balls have to be asymmetric, so you can understand the left from the right hand. You know, there's all these technicalities that we learn about motion capture that are quite exciting for us, and that really have a functional meaning, although these pieces now, of course, have a very different language. And I think that's also a bit of what I want to talk to in regards to future of design, because when we look at what is currently being experienced in life, there is most likely, and this is from my now being immersed in this project over the last 2 years, of course, there's most likely going to be some form of streaming in the future, where we will see what has been behind the scenes in terms of technology come to the front, and making that not just pleasurable, but also accessible to wider audiences is sort of always what we are keen to bring out. And there's more about that later on. So that's on the very heavy-sided technological end. Now, because we've got a whole other side to this, I'm going to switch over a bit and I'm going to go back to a historical reference. Because it really has influenced the next part of this work, which is still part of the project. So this, what you see here is the Tuta suit. And the Tuta suit is a garment that was made in 1919 as well by Ernesto Michaelis, an artist, a futurist who is also known under the palindrome Tayat. And what is so special about this suit is that it actually was released in a newspaper, so that people could reproduce it at home. And as the story goes, supposedly this was in Firenze, back then the fabric shops were emptied the next day. So people actually went and got fabric to make their own outfits. Now, there is something very special about it because it has 4 principles that I really enjoy about this piece. So Tuta is Italian for all. And the 4 principles that he incorporated in this piece is that it's for all the people, it's for all times, it's for the whole body, and all the fabric has to be used. So it actually is one of the early examples of zero waste pattern cutting. I don't know if you heard about that, but it basically means that you use all the fabric and you don't have wastage. Now, why is that so special? Because of course, at the time, especially, per tutta la gente, for all the people, was something that wasn't necessarily a design discipline back then, but it's something that really informed our thinking about how we want this experience to be and how we want the audience to feel when they come to the showcase, but also how they should participate from the early stages. And as I said in the very beginning, participation has been sort of a reoccurring theme in our work. So I just want, this is a little quote I put in here because I wrote a paper on collectivism just recently, and I think that this whole work is really based on that. So I think that collectivism, of course, is tinted as a word in many ways because it has all kinds of political neighbors. But I think what is really lovely is this quote, and it's taken from Donna Haraway's book, When Species Meet. And I think this whole idea of becoming with is really what describes what we are doing with this project, so that our experience should always be shared and never singular, but especially in the way that we produce and we design, we need to understand that there is a certain need to focus on becoming with, so that we really account for all the people around us. And so what is happening at the moment as we speak really is that there's people around the world designing outfits for the Dazzle Collective. And these are just some examples of the outcomes. So we started to work with first a school in Singapore. And there were students there who responded to a brief that we handed out. And the idea, of course, for them was to produce garments that could be worn by the audiences that would come to see the Dazzle experience. So when you come to the showcase, you get lent an outfit. You don't have to buy one, which already, you know, is based on the tutor principle as well, because it's a shared economy sort of. It also means that our work is rather sustainable because you don't have to go and buy a big dress for this event. But especially what is nice is that you get to see the people behind the scenes. So we had the school in Singapore. We also had a school in Germany. Actually, they're on the next page. These are the students from Germany, each of them in their outfit. And these are the outfits from Singapore. And then we also started working with collectives in Bangladesh who did these workshops with women from the garment factories, but also we are now talking to a organization in Rwanda. So we have artists from Rwanda reacting as well. So we try to really kind of represent through the outfits that you wear the global aspect of making fashion. And I think that again is where what has really become interesting for us is that this shared experience of making this project has of course made us think very differently about the work, but also now sees outputs in these places that are different to the ones that we had planned. So what I want to kind of stress here is that this open source idea of Dazzle, that we really don't feel like we have to have artistic authorship to the extent that you would maybe usually have in this project. So what happened as well is that whoever contributes to this Dazzle Collective with an outfit, there is a website for it called dazzlecollective.org. And all of the outfits are on there, and you see the makers behind them presented, but also you can download the pattern and you can make it at home. So again, the sort of tutor suit reference here. So, you know, because I think what often as well is part of our projects is that we want people to get engaged through workshops, through making their own things, because immersive for me also means that you can contribute, you can partake by making. So, you know, you can see, as I said, there is a lot going on in this project, but I think there's all these different elements that kind of are reoccurring in a way. And so I showed these already. I'll have a little film for you as well here. And this is what we've done over the last year is basically we went on little journeys into all different kinds of directions with this project. Although we have this big final showcase in mind, this is us actually in Marseille doing a residency and working with local dancers there. So also on the dance front, we're actually expanding and having dancers react to it in their own understanding of what the project might be. That was Bina and her dog, by the way. It's lovely because the more we open up, of course, the more the project becomes complex, but it doesn't have an end date, and that's quite exciting because what normally happens with projects is that you sort of produce for a certain show, or you have a sort of yeah, I mean, we have this final showcase in mind, of course, but I think what really has happened is that we have all these offshoots now that really start to form a very rich and multi-layered making, and that allows us to explore and experiment. And that's for us definitely exciting, but it also has it has its ups and downs. Yeah, so that's project number one. So I'm going to actually stop here, and I probably talked about half the things I should have talked about not. So you might have a lot of questions, and we can start with them right now before we go into the next project.
Any of the students?
Yeah, hello. I was wondering on what, maybe you mentioned it before, Emma, I missed it, but on what scale do you see this project being presented? Like, do you see it in a, or in what context, like in a museum, or do you envision it that it could be used by performers, like music artists or theater performances, or yeah, in what context do you see it? I was wondering.
So it will be in a sort of showcase in a venue. We like to talk of venue at the moment. We have a couple of things in the calendar for this year. But the beautiful thing is that it kind of morphs to what it needs to be. So we'll have a Dazzle showcase in one, a Dazzle collective showcase in one showroom here in London during Craft Week, where we really focus on that side. You know, so we actually show the work of all the makers behind the costumes. Then we'll have a showcase where we focus much. We had a showcase during London Film Festival in 2020, where we showed only the VR experience. And then the big together event couldn't happen yet because of all the restrictions, and you know, the togetherness, the idea of the project wasn't possible in that sense. But that will likely be in a sort of museum exhibition scenario. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Anyone else? Just jump in.
Yeah, I also had a question. When you were talking about the first tryouts with the Dazzle project, that the audience didn't really engage, how do you make sure you engage with an audience?
So what with the luxury of this project, again, because it's so long, is that we've done a lot of audience testing. So the project started in 2020, and we've been in the first showcase. We actually had this very strong experience for people where you come into a space and there's one dancer and you in VR, and you can see the dancer and you watch them, and it's people dancing around you that are multiples of the dancer. But then you realize that the dancer is real in the real world as well, because he reached out their hand and you could touch the hand, and then you realize that the avatar is a real person. So that worked really well, and people started to dance, and that was really what was the whole point of the piece as well, because of course on a costume ball you kind of want to get people to dance. Now with the showcase I showed earlier, we really understood exactly why what didn't happen. And that was the whole setting of the scene, because it was a demonstrator. There were talks in the beginning, and they had this huge LED screen, which is beautiful. But as soon as you have this huge LED screen, people will look at the huge LED screen, and you have the real strong separation between stage and audience space. And in our plans for the final showcase, that is much more broken up. But we do actually do body storming. So we invite people to the studio and lead them through the journey to understand how they react, and also to get their feedback and to improve that. Now, as said, that's quite luxury, because with all the projects we've done before that have been in similar spaces, we didn't have that budget or timing, or, you know, so in the end, it often is a bit of, you just have to see how it happens. And sometimes that's the really exciting part, because you can plan a lot of things. They will not go to plan, but the outcome might be something completely different that you didn't expect.
Cool, thanks.
If there's anyone else, I don't see everybody, so just make yourself known. Not yet. Alexa, it's really nice to see how you layer your projects, like, because you also bring in parts of almost theory and references, but then also experiences, shifting between maybe partly intuitive or really planned. So how do you balance them together? How do you start your projects off? Like the to the reference, is it something you come across? Is it like building up? A bit in reference also to students who start up their own projects, and then some people really set their project very much in concrete, like these are my references, but then you miss the openness. Sometimes people start so intuitive, they don't know how to anchor their project. Yeah. How do you experience that?
It's for me, it's a constant back and forth. I think it depends on the time scale again, of course, but I think what is really, I'll stop share actually, so you can, maybe we can have a better. So what is really important for me is that I usually start out with something that bugs me. you know, so there's always something that maybe isn't, I just feel like needs to be talked about. And then in the end, I'll go back and forth between reacting to that visually or with my practice, and going back to that and researching, of course, where that is situated within the different disciplines and how and what medium might be best to react to it. And then I think the sort of essence of it is always that I think quite early on, I start thinking about audiences. And I think that is really a key element to kind of drive the work, because you need to sort of understand how it can be met.
So for you, that is almost the sense of participation.
Yes.
And maybe for someone else who develops furniture, it might be application, like, oh, how is this applicable? So it's about being in that free space, but when you measure it too, that it will be met by a person or a function or a certain expectation of material, then you can then you have to go through these frictions also of making it fit and adjusting it. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And that really is a good driver, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, something for us all to remind, because it's very easy to float off. And suddenly you have you look at a material, maybe you work on prints, and you can, it's the same with what you said, if you draw in the digital space, you can make millions of outfits. Yeah. But in the end, it's like, how do you choose the right ones, and how do they work together, or how do they participate and react a relationship again? And, yeah.
And in terms of the outfits, especially, you know, you have a lot going on in terms of gender and so on. And one of the things that that really was a rule for the participants. So we gave them a couple of rules that they had to follow. They had to use zero waste. They had to make it one size fits all, so that the audiences wouldn't feel like they have to fit into a certain garment. And of course, it sort of then leaves behind the ideas of gender and so on as well. So you're really starting to become inclusive in that sense, because the audience isn't a singular person, and it's not the perfect little or big or small body.
No, it's an embodiment in a broader sense.
Yeah.
I'm just looking in all the rooms here. Is there anyone who has an urgent question or?
Yes, I do. Hi.
You do?
I was just wondering, why do you like working with performance to convey like a message or your work?
So I think performance in relation to the body, of course, is the first link. I think the moving body gives you a lot of possibilities to have a kind of equal footing with your audience, because it doesn't separate. It can really meander through the crowd. And I think that's really essential, but it also is a way of demonstrating, and I think with some of the other projects that might become really clear as well. It's a really good way of getting people to feel as if they are on the same ground, if that makes sense. And I think the fascination for the other is something that we then can always kind of reflect back on our own. So it's a kind of mirroring effect that I find most fascinating in that.
So performance for you is more a means of a tool than it's merely entertainment. Yeah. It's kind of shit, you use it in a way.
Exactly. And I think what is really nice as well is, because we work with performers, we don't ask them to do certain things. We let them react to the work. So that is always a collaboration, and that's really important, because they will react, and that's fascinating for us how they react to the work. But also it really, and most of them have experience with being in public spaces and activating people. Yeah. And activating people is a very hard task, but that mostly they are really professionals in.
Yeah. Idun, do you want to know more? Okay. Maybe what you just said on reacting is something that maybe is an interesting relation for students. Like often we can make things and then have someone explore it, or you make an outfit and you kind of want to see how someone is reacting, because that using of the body or each other's body is happening more and more. How do you narrate the kind of, how do you select the data that's coming back? Because that's sometimes quite hard, that someone's responding and you don't know how to filter out the response to continue with?
Yeah, I think when you go into public spaces, the responses that you get are so varied that if you have a next iteration of the project, which often happens for us, you can sort of include those reactions, but at the same time, you're not necessarily forced to do that unless you have funding where you have to explain what happens. And I think that's also the beauty of the, I really like this fluidity of it. I think the way that I see it with this project is we're actually talking about audiences that are exhibitionists and voyeurs. And we want to cater to both. So if you see other people in a space, and especially going into VR, they are the ones that are forthgoing. They will go into VR, they will do it, they will experience the whole thing. So they actually enter a stage, so they are exhibiting themselves as part of the work. And then the other side of it, though, is the people who don't want to do that, and they are more the people who like to watch. And I think reacting to both of these is really essential, because that's the only way you can make it a sort of inclusive experience. But it's both of them bring something to the table. And yeah.
Okay, thanks for giving insight. Maybe it's good to jump in the second part. I'm also keeping an eye on the time a bit.
Yes, of course. So the next one is a very different project. Not well, actually, well, it is. I guess it is different. Yeah, but I thought I'd bring it as well because it's one of the projects I feel that I'm very fond of for different reasons, but also because it's kind of critical for today's day and age to talk about these things in the practice as designers. So this is another collaboration, and it was a collaboration with a Bangladesh-based critical design studio they called Peut, and we met them here in London. We were introduced because of another project we did, and it's often these introductions that really are fruitful. The ones before also was an introduction. And Peut are mostly from an architectural background, but they try to engage with the communities that are in Dhaka, so the capital of Bangladesh. So in Dhaka, that are sort of left on the sidelines. And because of a project that we did before, they asked us to come and work with them for a moment of a suffragette, so the feminism movement in Bangladesh. And that was a very interesting call, and we were a bit doubtful whether we could do this, but because they were so well set up over there and they basically invited us to participate in their program that they run with the public there, we said, yes, okay, we're gonna give it a go. So Nari Shakti is Bangladeshi for the strength of women. And it very much is a comment on the garment factory workers there and the women especially, because actually they are sort of the backbone of the economy in Bangladesh, but not valued as such. And what we did was we went over there and we had this whole plan of having a parade in the end through the streets of Dhaka, where we would showcase the stories of different women through costume and performance again. And it was 6 weeks in total, and Peut have invited us over, and we had then decided that we would need some actors, local actors that were sort of well versed in doing some worker theatre performances in the streets. And we also then had them actually connect us to different organizations of women there who actually work in the garment factories, mostly because they also kind of see it as their bread and butter. So a way of out of oppression often by their families. And so putting these two agents into the same space, but then also putting fashion students from Dhaka into the same space, so that there was always a group of these three agents together to develop a story and a character that they would want to show on the streets of Dhaka. Now, what I should say probably as well is that protest in Dhaka in terms of garment factories is very common. It happens every week. And so people are actually really seeing it as a cultural everyday appearance, and they like to participate. It's very different to here in terms of protest. Maybe a little bit less now, but I think it definitely has been a strong way of expressing their voices. And we basically went to do these workshops, and in those workshops we asked the women to contribute what they feel made them strong. And there were little details like some said my sewing machine, others said I can do everything at once. And so what we did, we kind of used a fictional character that they designed together to express this superpower that they held. And then the actor was supposed to bring that superpower to life in his performance. And the women in general were, we did pay them for the time, because otherwise they couldn't have come from the factories to join us. It's on an everyday basis. But they sort of felt as if it was the first time that they were showcasing their understanding of fashion, because they started designing on those little potato heads you see down there. And it was a really interesting, and of course you have to meet a lot of expectations, your own expectations, but especially the expectations of them, because they come to the space, they're very critical of what is happening and why they are there. But because it's embedded in this sort of critical curriculum that Para have set up over there, we agreed to participate, because it is a long-term project. It's not just a moment in time where someone comes and does a project. It actually really helps them to develop their own skill set, and then basically offer them an education into that direction. So what happened, I mean, apart from this whole project being set in a time where there was huge protest in the country and there was lockdown, there was in terms of the government reacting to all kinds of, I'm not going to go into details, but the backdrop was pretty intense. We were really enjoying these workshops with these women, where they, in the end, decided that they should showcase the work rather than the actors. So out of the 10 groups that we had, I think at least 7 of them decided that they want to go into the streets themselves and showcase the work, which was very fascinating. And I was incredibly amazed by how they decided that they wanted to do that, because it meant a lot as a woman, especially in Dhaka, to go into the streets and speak out for yourself in a performance. It's not a small thing to do. So we had this route planned through the street, and we had sort of through Dhaka, and we had 4 points where we stopped to showcase the work. And what you can see, and I love it about this picture, is that mostly the viewers were men. And we had some good reactions as well as bad reactions. But we had also kind of gathered a critical mass of people to make sure that all these women were safe. We had to get police permission. That was another story that was really difficult, but it was an activation in the street. And what was really, really great, and we only realized it on the day that we did it, was that the costumes and the parade character of it was something that sort of disguised it as non-protest, but it was protest. So people were not sure how to react to it, because it wasn't an outspoken, in their face, this is wrong. It was a theatric exploration of telling a narrative, but in a very actually obvious way. And so that meant a lot to the women, actually, and I had a lot of them come to us afterwards. And we had exchanges for times. We also had a psychologist on site, by the way. So, you know, working in these spaces is hugely challenging, and I would not have done it if I wouldn't have been sure that locally there is the setup and the network there to do these things. We, of course, learned a lot in regards to how to handle such projects, but also how far you can go with individuals, because when they start telling their stories, you need to be quite careful not to go too far, because you end up in a sort of session where you're not a psychologist and you have to stop at some point. But I think what was really interesting about the work in regards to as a design project, that the power of the design in this moment was really that it was a visual representation that could sit within this world as well as within the world of protest. And so it kind of really was a medium that was ideal to start having these conversations with the public, which did happen to a large degree. And so here's a video that they edited afterwards. Oh, that wasn't the full video, sorry. But you see us walking through the streets and actually all these motorcycles kind of being annoyed with us, but then didn't know what we were doing there at the same time. So I think what was fascinating, and you see it in some pictures here on the side, was how, I mean, it was pretty obvious what was going on, but also the press reacted in a way that was fascinating. They actually, we had TV live coverage the whole day throughout the city. And I think the reason for that was surely partly because we were white people coming to Bangladesh, white designers doing something in that space. But it really got a lot of responses also in regards to those women and their families coming and discussing the topics. So you never know how exactly to measure the outcome of such projects, but I think it really does, give you the means to explore and connect and understand what is needed in those spaces. So it's one of the projects, and we're continuing the collaboration actually with Para on different levels. It's one of the projects where you can really see how, as I said before, yeah, the linking between those different worlds is quite important. And the outfits and costumes, of course, were mediums rather than the final outfit. They weren't important as an artifact per se. Oh yeah. So I'll stop here.
Jumping back on the table. Thanks, Alexa. So you have a little third part, Stella?
I do, but I don't know if we will get there.
Let's see. Let's look around the screen. Anyone having questions, jump in. What I like there about this project is that what you said earlier, it's almost taking this away from this kind of Eurocentric view, from seeing fashion as a garment or a sense of identity. But this is about a way deeper, like social, political space of where the garment is also a kind of safe space. Almost, it protects people, feels that they can give voice to things, to levels of what you said, like the social and the cultural tensions are on such different level. So a little piece of textile, just a thin cloth, is an interface to a whole different world, stuff that we often don't realize.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think even just having that as a way of starting to work together is really essential. You know, these workshops, because we all made things all the time.
Yeah.
It immediately leveled the ground.
Yeah.
You know, like you're making something together, you immediately are on the same level.
Because in our view, we think so much of fashion as a form of expression, but also when you look culturally, historically, this goes so way beyond that. So it's kind of humbling when you start peeling off that onion in many ways and start looking at a different layer.
Yeah.
I see Demi raising her hand.
Yes, I had a question because you talked about you had a psychologist that was there, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You said, yeah. Do you reference to him what you're going to do and get advice from him, or do you have some background in the psychology
No, I don't have background in that world. I wish I had, but I think, no, it was really, so Shoshana is someone who's been working within those realms of Dhaka for the last 20 years. And so she understands very well the situation of, because when you go into these other cultures, you have no idea what's going on. I mean, we don't even speak the same language. So that's why Para was really our sort of main part, or the ones who were setting up the whole project. And we were sort of facilitators for some of the things we contributed. So Shoshana, the psychologist, she was there to advise us on how far we should go, especially in regards to, you know, that's also why the characters had to be fictional, because we didn't want to end up in this, we're going to try and discuss all the needs you have world, because we wanted to actually make it a pleasurable experience for them. We just wanted them to have fun and to explore these other meanings of fashion. And usually, you know, when you go into these garment factories, they don't even produce a whole outfit. They only produce one seam and then it's handed on to the next person. So you don't even have the satisfaction of making a whole outfit. So in the end, one of my favorite comments from them was like, oh, I can be a fashion designer, right? And I was like, yes, you can. It's like, you know, it's just kind of making these connections, but also important for the students there, because they are working on concepts for fashion and they don't talk to the garment factory workers. And I think the same can be said for European students. You know, it's like you just never see that understanding of the production side of things really embedded. And so that was, for all the participants, a very important, I think, learning in regards to that. I think I kind of drifted off there from your question. I
think I got the point, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. But still relevant, Alexia, because I think what you said also, like, it's not just here that you work in design and you're disconnected from the modes of production. I also know that happens in other places. Like I worked in Karachi once with art students. They never met the craft women who were actually weaving, and they're only just one town further. So there's definitely a high hierarchy, and it also it happens in many places. And it's this urgency of, if you want to design and be creative, you have to stand out in the world and really get to know these. That's maybe why sometimes I hate the walls of the school, because it would be good when we get more out there. But it's great seeing your example of practice. And is there anyone else who would like to ask? Might be.
Yes, sorry, hi.
Hello.
Yes, I was wondering if you use this project to show it in Europe, or if like, did you, because I think it's super interesting to see the psychological point of view and how to open up the mind of the people over there. But then I was wondering if you use this project to show it to people in our continent, in our society, in our Western society, if I don't know, maybe it could be interesting to link this to see if it could have an impact maybe on us as well.
That's an interesting one, because I think there's one side of it where I'm trying not to blow the trumpet too much with this project, because in a way it has its existence in those worlds, and it really was concepted and made for the people there. And I think we have to respect that as well, and bringing it over here can sometimes be a bit difficult in that context. Although there is a huge, I think the second biggest Bangladeshi community is actually based in London. And we have connections with them, and we're looking into how we could work with them as well. And I think the aspect that, of course, is transpiring is that I learned a lot from it in regards to my understanding of what Bangladesh is, because for me it has been an abstract place beforehand. In regards to my practice as within some sort of fashion realm, and I'm a fashion educator at the same time. So I find it really difficult to have these conversations about made in Bangladesh being a bad thing, for example, or the garment factories that are being so negatively portrayed. And they, of course, are for good reason. I mean, Rana Plaza and so on and so on. But at the same time, over there, they have a really important role to play in regards to giving women, empower women to be looking after themselves. And that's one of the biggest learnings I took. Plus the other thing I learned, and that really is important for our realms, is that if we talk about made in Bangladesh as something bad, we're really not doing them a favor, because there is companies there who, and we actually had a sponsor from a company there, and they were trying to do sustainable, ethical production. They made textiles, we visited the mills and everything. And then they sold some of their textiles to H&M, who then called it sustainable. But then they asked for a certain price, and H&M said, no, we won't pay that price because it says made in Bangladesh, and that means we can't sell it for that price. So it's like, and you know, there's a beautiful story in relation to that about made in Germany, actually, because the Brits invented made in Germany to downgrade the product. And now and then it turned into actually being a really valuable product because it's made in Germany. And I discussed this with people over there, and we said, maybe we have to do a similar marketing campaign. You know, it's like, there's so much knowledge of making there, and so high quality making. And that really needs to come out again. And that's what Para is largely focusing on as well. And so I think that all of that is at the moment happening. And that's why I thought I'd bring you this project as well, because we are challenged as designers to think along those lines these days.
Yeah, it's good you asked it also, Nikki, because I think this talks about a lot of cultural and systematic change that is so hard to kind of inject into a way, what you said, like, oh, made in Bangladesh, and we right away reference it to what we understand of it, a lot of general assumptions, or we align it to very critical situations or crises. But on the other side, you said we need to be much more, we need to look in these nuances. There's so much more subtlety to that, and you can't just put the whole country with millions of people under one pile, because there's also a lot of good people wanting to do good things, but even they find it hard to get into the system. What you say, H&M has a bottom price, that's how they work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why I ask, because I thought that obviously, like, you're not H&M and you have a very different impact, and obviously you look for giving a different message, I think, through your fashion than what H&M is doing. But you do, if you're here talking with us today, it's because you have an impact and because you have a career. So I was thinking how amazing it could be to actually show these people how you said, oh, they suddenly realized that they could be fashion designers. How maybe it could help, because I guess it could help us as students now to understand that, hey, Bangladesh has such a talent, and we shouldn't see them as just like the craftsman, or not even just like the tool human.
Yeah.
How to show those as the main actors and as the main fashion designers, and has even the main, like, yeah, they show themselves in the streets to change the mentality of people here.
I mean, and that's probably why I did the Dazzle Collective thing. You know, it's like you really, when you then start having your own practice in this, and you always try to then include other voices, or I think that's what you can do as an individual, I guess. And so the women from that project contribute to the Dazzle Collective now, so they actually become designers for pieces that are worn here.
Yeah.
And that you know, you kind of switch around the production versus designing side of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that I do show it here, of course, to discuss exactly these topics that we're discussing today.
Yeah.
Reproducing it here would be a different story, I think, because it was just so specially made for that.
That's good you shared. I think it's more that we all realize there needs to be made space for this dialogue, conversation, for you bring for us an educational part almost to it, what Nikki's saying, like how can we become aware of that system? Because also for education, these worlds are often quite far away. If I look at time, if you want, you could give a glimpse of the third part, because it's interesting that you come from this kind of interface that is very technological, digital, to this one that is almost more social and cultural.
Yeah, I can do. I mean, we it's so difficult because I was sitting here and I was like, which project should I show? And so in the end, the third one I have in here is Indivicracy, which is quite old, but I thought because you were looking at different ways of designing, that this one might be of most interest. So I'll just play this briefly. So this is a project that was my after graduation and that I was designer in residence at the Design Museum in London. And it was the first time that I combined all these things I'm combining today. So dance, costume, technology, artifacts. And it basically tells the story of a future form of government. So it is very much a speculative design project. It has a whole timeline developed that shows the different moments in 100 years that make our world become, basically a place where there is one government that can exist outside of borders. And it's based on social networks. But what is really important, and I'm not going to go too much in the research, which is huge in this project, but really what was important was the way that I presented it to the audiences again. So in the Design Museum, I had this room where you would come in and you had the 4 characters that you saw in the video before standing there, and all of them had different motivations why they would migrate. And so each of them you could actually activate and learn their dance steps. So this is the Motionist, one of my favorites. But each of them, as I said, represented different reasons why people migrate. And the whole idea was that migration is such a tinted word, really negatively loaded today. And there's so many really good reasons to not see it like that. And so I basically designed a national dance and the national costume for this future form of statehood, where all the individuals would contribute a part of their reason for migrating to the dance. And the audience came to the Design Museum and they went in and they could learn the dance. Therefore, the idea was that they would join this nation and embody the idea of this future collective. And so there were the artifacts outside that were explaining along the timeline how you would come to, like when you come to a National History Museum today and you see artifacts being laid out, they tell about the history of a culture. And so this was my fictional culture of the future where we can actually transgress borders. So yeah, that was a very brief look into that. But the reason why I'm bringing it, and you can read more about it in, it's still online. It's called indivicracy.org. So there's the whole history of the statehood, the whole dance, and all the artifacts on there. But the reason why I thought I'll bring it as well is because it really was a project that shaped my practice to these different elements, but also because it is, again, one that is very strongly based on having something that bugs you. And back then it really bugged me, and that was before the migrant crisis. It was actually happening whilst I was in the museum. So it was very much a relevant topic back then, and it still is, and even more today, I guess, now that our borders are starting to shut down, but also where we see these networked societies and the dream that we have of them and where we are ending up is some big topic for me as well. So that just as a little teaser at the end, maybe.
Teasers are good because I think your practice is very diverse. You have such a variation of looking at it. I think that's also what you like, coming from the Bachelor of Fashion, but then going to interaction. It is transferring in such another world, and I really liked how you positioned it in the beginning. Like, this is about being disciplinary, but within the means of understanding your own kind of ground in many ways. And then you can transfer from that ground to these different zones.
Yeah. And what was really important with this project as well is the physical part, the making was really intense, and I cannot highlight enough to really become a specialist in making something, because it really does give the project enough. I think now reflecting back on this project, it does give it enough professionalism for people to start believing in it. So the finished artifact, the finished whatever it is you're making, to
With
have
you,
that
it's always-
made a high standard,
Yeah.
open source, because it's the first thing that people react to.
Yeah.
And you can have all these big thoughts. If you don't have something that is appealing or drawing interest of your audience, you won't win them over.
Yeah. I think, but crucial for you is always this kind of connection, like the participation, either with public or with professionals and collaborating with others. And you're not a soloist. You're not someone who sits alone and works. You need people around you.
Very important, yes. Totally.
Yeah. Is there still any student who wants to say something? Otherwise, we might go for a big thank you and seeing the time also a little bit. And just unmute if you have a question. No? Okay. Thanks, Alexa, for being inspirational and sharing your practice and the diversity of it. And I'm sure people will go online and dig a bit deeper in what is all behind the scenarios of what you're doing. But let's give a quite visible thank you, and then
thank you all. Yeah, and have fun. I know it's at difficult times with being online, but I think as